And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio. This is episode number 37 of Assembly Call Radio and our 329th episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of Thursday, July 27th, 2017. I'm Andy Bottoms, your host for this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio, where each week we break down the most important IU basketball stories from the past 7 days. And remember that if you can't catch one of our shows live, you can always catch up with us on our podcast. Just search for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts, and you'll find us. So let's begin here how we always begin, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment. And in a week that did not feature a flurry of recruiting commitments, as the guys were able to talk about last week, this one stood out pretty easily as well. Yesterday, or maybe it was earlier this week, Archie Miller tweeted out, "The offseason is when you earn the right to be great, proud of entire team, efficient, and got results." One stood out above all, though, and that person, who is probably the most talked about guy on this IU roster over the course of the offseason, in large part because of his potential and the focus that Archie really brought in his opening press conference about how hard he was going to ask him to work and transform his body, and that's De'Ron Davis. And so Miller's next tweet was, "Congrats, De'Ron Davis, on an incredible 12 weeks, took home the belt." A pretty snazzy looking championship belt, and it said Clif Marshall is a proud coach. #total development. So a lot has come out since then about De'Ron and how hard he's worked. Said he's down 21 pounds overall, trimmed his body fat by 5%, increased his vertical jump by 8 inches, and just among the many accolades that he received in the offseason. And as we've talked about so often, because of the general lack of height and front court depth on this roster, his development is going to really go a long way toward determining what IU season looks like. And so certainly give him a lot of credit for putting in the work and really responding well to that challenge that Archie put forth for him in that initial press conference. And certainly we'll see how that all translates on the court. But really cool to see, a guy at that age really dedicate himself to his craft and to improving his body. And we'll certainly talk more about Clif Marshall and some of the things that he's done. But to me, that was the easy banner moment from this week, which is again brought to you by our friends at HoosierProud.com. And so with that, I'll introduce my esteemed co-host for the evening. We've got Zach McCright with us. Ryan is off doing who knows what, and Jared is off celebrating his daughter's first birthday. So, a good reason to be off. And Zach is, recovering from the, having a newborn. So I'm sure you got tons of sleep, lots of energy, and ready to talk about some IU basketball tonight, Zach.
Yeah. I'm always waiting for recovery day. It never seems to come. I was just actually.
Clif Marshall's big on recovery. I learned that this week. So he's looking out for you. You just need to take heed.
Clif Marshall would be mad at me because I would not be a good pupil. He wants me to recover, and I'm like, there's no time to recover. I'm breaking down with every single day, but it's all good. I always tell the parents out there, or the parents to be, it's a good kind of tired. It's a different kind of tired, but I'll digress. I wanted McCright's minute or whatever we call this tonight. I wanted to give a shout out, and we may talk about this later, but to Thomas Bryant. I was one of the guys, I'm raising my hand for the radio audience, guilty as charged. I didn't see this guy being ready for a guaranteed deal in the NBA. I just didn't, and I thought it was a mistake that he left. And I'm completely wrong. I'm completely wrong. The guy completely worked his way into a roster spot on the team and into it. The big thing is he worked his way into a guaranteed year of basketball in the NBA and of a basketball salary in the NBA. So, when he got drafted 42nd, I was like, it's kind of where, everybody thought he was going to be. Was this the right move? Was it not the right move? I really thought, he could, if he could just have himself a really great year under a new coach, that he could vault his way up into some serious money and a nice 2-year contract to get things started for his NBA career. But I could always see the other side with him. You can always go, well, new coach, what's going to happen? What's he going to do with me? Is my style going to fit his style? and all that stuff. So, maybe you just let bygones be bygones and hit the road and try to make yourself and your family some money and hit a lifetime goal. So it all worked out. It all worked out. So I'm very proud of him. I was a huge Thomas Bryant fan. Actually, I really wasn't at first. He grew on me probably more than many other players in IU basketball lore. So I'm super, super happy for him to get that contract. That was news that came out Thursday night that he's got a 1-year deal with the Lakers guaranteed. The second year is a team option. So super happy for him and ready to watch him for the Lakers. It's probably nice that he hit the Lakers, when they're on the, kind of on a downward trend. I say downward trend. They were, they're kind of low on depth, I'm assuming, and maybe on the upward trend. It might have been the perfect spot for him to land. So happy for him and excited for a good show tonight.
Yeah, I think, Brian is interesting. You wonder if you'll see, we've talked about Troy Williams, who also, recently signed a deal, kind of matured. I don't know that matured kind of in the same way as a lot of people would think of it with Bryant from a more of an emotional standpoint, but just from a, really being able to hone in on the things that he does well. So hopefully Bryant can do some of the same thing. I think to your point, the Lakers, both from a depth standpoint, from a salary cap standpoint, he kind of became an attractive option for them. And like Yogi and like Troy, who really made the most of the opportunities that they got because they found themselves in good situations. Hopefully he can do the same. But certainly exciting news for him to kind of have that under his belt at this point of the offseason and can continue working and try to work his way into the rotation for the Lakers with Lonzo Ball. So certainly won't be the center of attention in that scenario. So we know that piece will not be at play.
Yeah, and as you were mentioning, the guys, think about what these IU players have done. A lot of them drafted, obviously under the Crean regime, drafted low or not drafted at all in some cases, and still found a way to either through, summer league basketball in Bryant's case, or with the D League in the other cases, or G League now, whatever the case may be, found a way to get themselves on an NBA roster and sign an NBA contract. I think it really speaks well of those players to kind of have that mettle, for lack of a better term, to be able to do that. And all of them came under the IU umbrella. I think that's very cool.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So among the topics we'll plan to hit tonight, a quick note on the potential IU-Arizona series. Some news that came out over the weekend or early this week. More on that, the player development under Clif Marshall, Twitter questions as usual, and probably fit in a few other things as we go along on this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio. First, a quick word about this week's sponsor, SeatGeek. Buying tickets to sports and concerts can be complicated, but there's a better, simpler way to buy with SeatGeek. It's the smartest, easiest way to get tickets to live events, and with SeatGeek's seamless mobile experience, you can buy and sell tickets in just 2 taps. SeatGeek helps you find the best seats at the best prices, fully guaranteed. There's nothing quite like seeing your favorite team or musician in person, and SeatGeek will get you closer to the action for a great value. SeatGeek app on my phone, and it's by far the easiest way I've found to shop for tickets. It can be anywhere with just a few taps. I can instantly find seats. We talk about being able to see some of these guys. The NBA season is probably closer than we think it is. So certainly with the number of IU players in the NBA, be lots of opportunities as that season opens up. You got baseball season, which in Cincinnati here is not going all that well, but certainly opportunities to see your favorite players on the baseball field, and then football training camps are opening up, so that means there'll be NFL and college football games to look at tickets to as well. So lots of opportunities to use SeatGeek. I'm sure that I will be using it myself as the fall approaches, and really overall it's designed to make the ticket buying experience easier than ever. Saves you time and money by searching multiple ticket sites to compare prices and find you the best deal. That allows you to get the most bang for your buck because SeatGeek grades every ticket based on value to help you immediately identify the best seats that fit your budget. And every purchase is fully guaranteed, so you can shop for tickets on SeatGeek with full confidence. So make SeatGeek your go-to app for finding the best deals on every type of ticket, from sports and concerts to comedy and theater. And best of all, listeners here get $20 off their first SeatGeek purchase. Download the SeatGeek app and enter promo code ASSEMBLY today. That's promo code ASSEMBLY for $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. All right, you're listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Andy Bottoms here with Zach McCright talking IU basketball. And we don't know any more about the schedule than we did a week ago. An interesting bit of future scheduling news cropped up this week, something that, I think Archie Miller had alluded to at times and seemed like a potentially natural fit. But, some discussion of a 3-year series between IU and Arizona. So this came out from John Rothstein, so I can only assume there was palpable buzz about this potential series, which would run from 2019 to 2022, include a game in Tucson during the 2019-20 season, Bloomington during the 2021 season, and at Madison Square Garden in New York City for the 21-22 season. Just any quick thoughts from you, Zach, on what that means, if it surprises you that that the brothers moving that quickly. I think some guys in that scenario don't like to play each other. I don't know what the Harbaughs feel about this. That's probably maybe one of the examples that's come up recently. But I don't know. Any quick thoughts on kind of what that means and any excitement you've got around that?
I would be interested to get their thoughts on why they are so eager to play each other. I can only imagine playing my brother and choosing to play my brother if we were playing against each other, and I don't know if I'd like that. Now I'm the older brother, and I would be afraid that if I wouldn't want him to lose on such a national stage. I always wanted him to lose whenever we were playing each other, but I wouldn't want him to lose on such a national stage in front of that many people. So, what I do like about, just an interesting nugget that I like about it is I love the neutral site game. And I think I've made this point before on this very show that, there's some sort of palpable buzz. Isn't that what Rothstein said? Isn't that what his palpable buzz?
Oh yeah, he's big palpable buzz guy, big repeated quote guy. Yeah, sure.
About the neutral site game and Madison Square Garden, obviously that works for me too. So that will have a lot of marketing behind it that will make the lead up to it will be exciting whenever that game does hit, not just in Madison Square Garden but also in the other home and aways on there. So I'm big on this one. I love it. I kind of wish it would start earlier, honestly. But I was shocked to find out that IU had never played Arizona. That to me is shocking, and I'm wondering, and maybe somebody can do this for us. Somebody in our listening audience can do this for us. This is what I like to call Zach being lazy and the listeners do the work. Okay.
All right.
I'm sure Arizona's got to be number one. Who would be number two in the best college basketball program that IU has never faced? I'd have to imagine it has to be way down the list, like of best programs all time, because Arizona seems like just the biggest absolute anomaly ever, that IU has never played somebody of that sort of college basketball stature. So I'm wondering who second would be.
Yeah, that is an interesting one. I thought that was funny too. I was looking before the show, so I did do at least some research, not enough to answer your question, of course, but I did enough to figure out, I was like, I don't really remember IU playing Arizona, but it was one of those where maybe they played in a tournament somewhere and I, had just forgotten about it. And then, lo and behold, I hadn't played them at all. So definitely an interesting tidbit. So maybe somebody can get back to us on that and we can touch on it next week.
Thanks in advance, everyone. Thanks in advance.
Yes, thanks in advance for your work, everybody. That's exactly what we're looking for. But, hey, we did part of the work. We went part of the way there to figure out who they haven't played. Now it's just a matter of figuring out any other. I think it would be hard to find even just other major conference teams that they haven't played yet. Just if you think about over the time period that it's been, even
like
teams
Power 6 conferences.
Yeah, even teams that might not be good, right? I mean, that was kind of your question, but I would just be curious to even wonder how many of those kinds of teams haven't played at all. I think as I was looking, I just did a search for Arizona. I think they've only played Arizona State once, so potentially just some bad blood between them and the Pac-12 within that state that we're just not aware of.
Yeah, maybe it's the Pac-12. I mean, obviously, you would assume that's probably the first place for all of our researchers, all of our pro bono researchers to look west and furthest away and see if we can't find a team of some sort of stature close to Arizona, albeit I can't imagine it being too close, who we haven't played. I'd be very interested.
Yep, I would agree. All right. Well, we will come back. We're going to talk a little bit more about Clif Marshall and some of the player development news that came out this week, and kind of see what we can make of that. All right. Got down 15, 20. All right. Welcome to the Google Hangout audience.
Hello, Google Hangout.
As always. So, all right, let me listen back to that, make sure that it actually recorded. It's fairly important. All right. That was about 15 minutes, so I just saved we can hit that other schedule question in the Twitter section if we need to.
Nice.
We'll hang on to that one. Let's see. Today is July 21st, 27th. All right. Yeah, we'll just kind of see how long I'm going to go on the Clif Marshall stuff. Like I said, I started just putting some notes in there. I had listened to the podcast earlier, and then that was, I think, before I knew I was going to be hosting the show. So I listened to it again quickly just to see if there was anything else, because I was listening to it at work the first time and obviously wasn't taking notes. So at least got back a little bit from there. So we can I just put my notes in the thing. We can
I got you.
Kind of talk through whatever we want to talk about. But we'll just I'll start with Davis and with some of the other photos that came out. And then maybe I'll hit our potential assembly call. Wait, whatever he called it. Weight loss challenge.
I'm in. Let's do it.
All right. Let's see. Intro music I got to play, and we'll get rolling. All right. All right, you are listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Andy Bottoms here talking IU hoops with Zach McCrite, and wanted to circle back a little bit, Zach, to not only the Deron Davis news that came out this week in terms of him winning the offseason championship belt, if you will, but also a number of the other. I think some of these came from the players, and some came from the IU Twitter account. Some pictures came out of basically how some of the guys have transformed themselves over the time that Clif Marshall's been there, which I'm guessing because Archie's tweet referenced 12 weeks, over a 12-week period. So had Freddie McSwain, Colin Hartman, Robert Johnson, I think even Quentin Taylor was out there. Just some of the kind of physical transformations those guys have made over the course of the offseason. And I think obviously it's easy to get excited about those kinds of things and hard to know what they really mean on a basketball floor. But, from your standpoint, as you heard the news about Davis and kind of saw some numbers to the improvements that we've all heard about him making, saw some of the photos of the other guys, what's the, kind of big message for you in seeing some of those kinds of things come out?
Well, a couple things. First off, I at the expense of sounding very awkward as a man, I was most impressed by the transformation of Freddie McSwain. I mean, you can probably fry an egg on that abdomen of his these days. Just sleek. Well done, fella. So I like what he did. Obviously, all these guys, the transformations are crazy. I think when you ask what does it say about the entire group, I'm shocked, honestly, that this sort of impression was made by what I'm assuming is the athletic performance coach on this many guys, or Archie Miller, that they were able to make such an impact and get into the psyche of these guys going, look, this is the way it's got to be. And not only being able to do that, but for this, not just one, but this many guys to be able to answer and go, you're right. We can all do this. I mean, think about let's all harken back to our college days and what we were doing during the summer. I can promise you it was not making an 8-pack out of my abs. Like, that's one thing I was definitely not doing. And all of these guys decided, I'm going to do this. Like they're getting, like, they're honestly, what it looks like is all of these guys are getting ready for a bodybuilding competition. And I know that sounds cliche, but it really does look like that. Like they were, like, what they were doing was eating tuna out of a can or out of a pouch for the last 12 weeks. So I just can't. What I'm impressed by is that many people on the team were able to do it. And I don't know. How do you improve your vertical by 8 inches? 2 players did that. And Deron Davis was already. I thought he played above the rim pretty damn good last year, and he added 8 inches to his vertical. That's insane. And what Juwan Morgan, 8.5 inches to his vertical. So I'm super impressed, and I'll throw something on the back end at the end of this, but I'm just super impressed with how all of these guys decided to get together and go. My guess is one of the messages was like, last year isn't good enough, and part of the burden falls on us. And this is the way they've answered during a summer where I'm sure they would have liked to have done a whole lot of other things.
Yeah, it was some of the numbers. I mean, like you said, again, I'm assuming that it's roughly 12 weeks just because, trying to back into timelines and different things like that. So I'm assuming this is 12 weeks. If it's not 12, it's not substantially more. Those kinds of improvements I talked about in Marshall's Twitter feed at various times. He kind of talked about, different guys. So McSwain set a bench press record at 30 reps. I'm not sure at what weight, but 30 reps for me at any weight would be, pretty difficult. So he was, he had 22 the first week. So he went up 8 in a relatively short period of time. Robert Johnson did 32 pull-ups, which was up from 16 in week 1. I assume that's in a, kind of a specific time frame. So just kind of amazing, not only just the accomplishments and the transformations in and of themselves, but over a relatively short time frame. And, one of the other things as we, kind of, continue to talk about Clif Marshall is he was on the Indiana Unscripted podcast that Jeremy Gray does and the athletic department's put together. So he's had a handful of different guests, not just basketball related, but, happened to have Marshall on this week. And I know Jared tweeted some things out from the Assembly Call account for it, for everybody to take a listen. I definitely encourage everybody to do that because Marshall just comes off as incredibly engaging, incredibly, kind of direct a little bit in the same way that Archie Miller is, but seems just kind of soft-spoken and, has a message, but isn't necessarily like in your face about it. And
right.
Yeah. And I think it's funny because, everybody is going to do this with Archie Miller and with Crean. And we've, talked a little about this with, Lionel Anderson, who was there and was, trash talking on the bench and jumping up and down and all those kinds of things. And it's like, one of those where this guy sounds like the complete opposite, whether that's really true or, we're all viewing that through different colored glasses. But just a really interesting listen to kind of get his philosophy and how he got started on some of this. Zach, I know you said you've been able to listen to at least some of it. Any big takeaways from you from, hearing him talk about how he goes about his job at developing these guys at IU? Well,
one of the things you hit on that I also thought was very interesting was he's very he just seems very calm. You wouldn't assume. I'll just put you this way: every strength coach that I've been around, and I can't act like my athletic careers had any sort of prowess to it, but any strength coach that I've been around certainly didn't come off sounding like that, whether they were in a weight room or not in a weight room. And so I did notice that. And just as an aside, one of the other things I noticed, isn't it odd? The guy is from a town called Cynthiana, Kentucky. Okay, that town. I live in the very southern tip of southern Indiana, right across the river from Louisville. So I actually know where Cynthiana, Kentucky is, and I'm sure you might as well, Andy. But it's probably a stone's throw from Lexington. So let's just say he's in the UK area. All right. then decides, enough with UK, I'm going to the University of Louisville for school. And then he all of a sudden, after a couple, puddle jumps here and there, ends up in Indiana. So he continues to move north against the rivals here, the Kentucky, the Louisville, and now on the as I like to call it, God's country here in Indiana. So that I just found that very interesting for people that watch this and listen to this show especially in southern Indiana, people south of Bloomington, to just have those three schools all intertwined with this one guy is something that I know a lot of people around here at least would find interesting. That he shunned Kentucky almost altogether, went to undergrad at U of L, and now ends up in Indiana. The other thing I do want to throw out there about let's just say all these guys together. We give Tom Crean a lot of guff, and I'm not going to act like this throughout the course of the show that we might not give him a little guff, but let's do a compliment sandwich at least with him and give you a little bit of good stuff on the front end. We have talked already tonight about Thomas Bryant, Troy Williams, Yogi Ferrell, about how the mettle that they had, just the inner drive to find a way into the NBA. And now you've got guys on this IU team that have found a way inside of them to grind and make their bodies look completely transformed, that they have that inner drive in them. And I do want to give some sort of tip of the cap to Tom Crean in that department. For all the guff that we all give him, and some of it's deserved, most of it's deserved. One thing that he did really well was he found guys that had that they appear to have something a little extra inside them, that have some sort of inner drive that you don't necessarily see in college sports anywhere, and that is showing itself in the NBA, and it's showing itself during the summer. So a tip of the cap to Tom Crean in that department as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You're listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Andy Bottoms here with Zach McCray talking IU basketball, and a couple other kind of quick things I jotted down in listening to Clif Marshall on that podcast, on the Indiana Unscripted podcast. He really talked about as soon as he knew he wanted to do something with training, he talked about really wanting to be in a position to kind of teach and share with people his passion for it. Talk about being a teacher at heart, but also really being a mentor to these guys. And he talked about to build on he's kind of built on what he said, results and relationships. He said, but results are temporary and relationships are eternal. And I think you can see from a lot of these guys that he's really done a pretty incredible job in a short amount of time, really building those relationships with these players. And I think we often don't realize that. I think ESPN had an article about this, which they referenced in the podcast, but it was, in some ways the strength coaches and people like that are, particularly in the off season, who the players are able to, because of, whatever ridiculous NCAA rules exist, kind of who they can spend the most time with. And, so I think there's really a lot to that, and liked a lot of what I heard just in his philosophy about, working with them and mentoring them and preparing them. But do you think that people kind of underestimate the importance of guys in a position like Clif Marshall as we start thinking about all the different components of a college basketball program? Is that a piece that gets overlooked at times in your eyes, or is it just an area that we're all of a sudden interested in because we heard him talk about it?
Well, maybe a little bit of both. I mean, now that you mention it, yeah. I mean, we don't talk about it very often, and nobody does. Nobody in any program talks about it very often. So I'm sure there's a little bit of truth to that. But my guess is that this stuff probably happens at a lot of schools. But what I find at least different about this guy, at least from what we can tell on the surface, having not met him, having never seen him, execute a session in public with these guys, is that when you've got a guy, and again, like Andy said, I think I urge you all to listen to this podcast with Jeremy Gray does with Clif Marshall. With Clif's demeanor being so calm, at least in public and at least behind a microphone, you can kind of, my guess is if that sort of personality translates to the weight room, and he's able to still get that sort of production out of these guys, that it probably has to do with his ability to create relationships with these guys. Like, you've got to really, like, if you're not going to be, my guess is if you're not going to be up in somebody's face, if having just met the guy, if you're not going to be up in somebody's face and trying to motivate them just by, very, very on the surface, screaming, getting them motivated, come on, lift this, pull this, et cetera, you're probably not going to get through to a lot of these guys unless you're able to do that. If you don't, unless you knew them previously. And so for him to have this sort of demeanor seemingly and be able to still get that sort of production out of these guys, my guess is it really does kind of show just how well he is able to connect mentally with these guys and get that sort of production out of them.
Yeah, I would agree. And he's even inspired Jared, who is trying to organize an assembly call weight loss challenge, which I have agreed to on the condition that I do not have to provide or view shirtless photos of any of you. So I'm willing to participate, but that's something that probably nobody wants to see anyway. And certainly,
I won't
just Photoshop myself onto Freddie McSwain's body and just see what happens. I think is what I might go with in that case. But
I promise I won't show any nipple right now to those of you watching on YouTube. But I'm very tempted to, just so you can see the difference here in a couple weeks. No, Jared's got us, and I guess he's agreed to it. Seemingly, by the way, and you all can give him hell about this next week. Ryan seems to be very quiet about this. Ryan seems to be very, very quiet. I haven't heard anything from him yet on this, but it seems like the other three have gone yes, yes, and yes. And Jared is throwing out the challenge of 8% weight lost before Hoosier Hysteria. Now, what is that now? How many? August, September? Is that 12 weeks? Is that like about 12 weeks?
It's usually October. That's probably 12-ish weeks, I would say. Obviously, I don't have the date set, but it's sometime mid October.
That's gonna be tough for a big one like me. I'm gonna be honest with you, but I don't know. We'll see. I did like, by the way, that Clif Marshall said, for every minute of skill work, 1 minute of recovery. Always good to know. Always good to know, because I think there's a lot of people out there, me included, that for a long time would just almost race to the next thing because it just, or especially with some trainers I've had in the past, race to the next thing because you wanted to make it a cardio workout too, on top of your strength training. And maybe we just need to give ourselves a break. He's telling you deserve a break. So I like that out of Clif Marshall too. Yeah,
I thought it was interesting. He brought that up in the context of, seeing guys like Robert Johnson be in the gym all the time, and he kind of made them a deal. He said for every minute of that, you need a minute of recovery, whether that's, in the ice tub or, stretching or whatever the case may be. So definitely interesting and stuff we'll need to follow in our weight loss challenge. So
for every one piece of celery, you get one donut. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. All right, coming up, we'll answer the questions in our weekly IU basketball mailbag. Stick with us.
But that was long, wasn't it?
I need to go back and look. It was about the same as the first one, I want to say.
I thought it might have been longer.
Let's see. I need to go back and look at it right when I. It was longer. 1652. Let's see. At 32. to so we got about 17 minutes left, so we'll try to keep this one to 10 or so. We'll try to hit the questions
Cool.
relatively quickly. Most of them, I think, are pretty quick answers, I would say. And, all right. We'll get us going on that. Welcome back. You're listening to the Assembly Call. Go to assemblycall.com/join to activate your free membership. You'll get our weekly 6-banner Saturday news roundup delivered right to your inbox each Saturday or Sunday morning, so you can stay up to date with your Hoosiers during the offseason and even once the season begins. URL, again, is assemblycall.com/join. This is Andy Bottoms, and I'm here talking IU basketball with my co-host on the Assembly Call, Zach McCright. And this, as always, is the part of the show we like to get to everybody's Twitter questions. The one thing, while news may die off in the offseason, the one thing that never seems to die off is the pool of Twitter questions. So for us, that is definitely a good thing, and we like to hit as many of these as we can. So we'll dive in. Looks like this question says, Jack Allen Martin, who do you guys think will be the most important IU basketball player next year for the Hoosiers to succeed? Zach, who you got?
Well, I mean, I'm going to go Deron Davis. I feel like that's probably the easy choice to make, just because of the lack of depth really inside for IU this year. That, you know, he kind of has to – he's going to have to play a lot of – not just offensively well, but defensively well. Defense might be even more important for Deron Davis next year, not to get into foul trouble when this team needs him. I feel like he's the kind of guy who you almost, and correct me if I'm wrong, you probably going to have to play 30, 32, 34 minutes a game in an ideal world. Again, I could be wrong about that. Maybe Archie thinks this team, and maybe a lineup will suffice or will surface, I guess, that you know, we can go, well, maybe this team's all right playing a little bit smaller. But I think it's probably got to be Deron Davis. I will give an honorable mention to Colin Hartman. I think just his return and him being a senior, kind of being able to set the tone for the team might be an honorable mention, but I'll go Deron Davis.
Yeah, I think that to me is probably the obvious choice. I'll throw out a couple others. I think Robert Johnson is a really important one, not just as the president of the Robert Johnson fan club, I say that, but just because, you know, we've talked about this before. You know, Deron Davis is really talented, and certainly IU will look to get him the ball in the post quite a bit. But you also are going to need at times somebody who can go out and get their own shot from the backcourt. And you know, Rojo to a certain extent is kind of last man standing with, you know, as Yogi has left and James Blackman Jr. has left. So I think he becomes really important in that capacity and really needs to become a consistent shooter, scorer, you know, night in, night out, a guy that you can expect things from. The other guy I'll kind of throw out, we touched on him earlier, you know, Freddie McSwain, while maybe not the most important, I think becomes a real X factor, because is he a guy who now with all this added strength that you can try to steal minutes when you need to rest Deron Davis? Is he a guy who you can just put in there to really battle and be an energy guy, and a guy who could really thrive in a, you know, defensive pressure system like what Archie Miller wants to run? So I think a number of good choices. I think Deron is probably the guy most people would pick, but I think there's a handful of other guys that'll be interesting to watch as well.
Yeah, McSwain's a good one too, by the way. I'm with you on Johnson. Johnson aside, I mean, you're right. The scorer has got to continue to be the scorer. But outside of that, I think anybody who might be put at the 5 spot this year, I think fits the category of somewhere in the vicinity of most important player on next year's squad.
Yep, I would agree. All right, next one is from Kix Milla. With Archie pushing this Arizona series deal, do you think this helps, hurts, or doesn't affect playing Kentucky again?
That's a good question. I don't know. My guess is, I think gun to my head, I think whatever needs to be done for IU to play Kentucky, I think IU will do it. They might have to get themselves out of a contract or two. And if I'm not mistaken, I think we already saw that with the one tournament that IU is kind of bowed out of. And am I dreaming that? I can't remember the name of the tournament, but
no, there was supposed to be something in New York this year that they, kind of bought their way out of to, even in the offseason. I think even before the coaching change was made. So yeah, you're not dreaming.
And I thought that was more than a 1-year thing too. So I could be wrong on that, but I think those sort of concessions IU would make again with something else if they had to get Kentucky on the schedule, minus maybe the Big Four in Indy that get together every year with those guys, maybe minus that. But so I'm going to say no. I think it's a good question. I'm going to say it has zero effect at all on Indiana's chances, however big they might be, playing Kentucky again.
I lean a little bit more towards it hurts, just in the sense of if you start thinking about, opportunities for bigger games. Now, this season is certainly unique with what the Big Ten is doing and where the games fall in. But if you start to spin that forward to potential 20-game Big Ten season, you start to infringe on the number of total non-conference games you can schedule, and by proxy, the number of marquee non-conference games you can schedule. And we know that one's always going to be there as part of the Big Ten ACC unless that changes. The Gavitt games are a little bit less year to year, but at the very least every other year, you're doing something there. The Crossroads is going to be there, it seems like, in the near term. And then in the very near term, you've got the Louisville series, which has another couple of years on it, I believe. So probably doesn't help. The fact that it's a little bit further down the road gives some more flexibility. And those things don't even discuss the potential for, different tournaments and other pre-conference tournaments. So I don't think it hurts a lot. I definitely don't think it helps. So I guess I'd be more inclined to say it hurts a little, but probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not a ton.
I'm with you on it doesn't help. It doesn't help. But kind of like you said, so you talked about the one thing I'm worried about is the one thing it sounded like you weren't worried about, that it's kind of down the road. And my thought is, well, if this is ever going to get back underway, this IU UK series, it's going to be down the road. And an extra roadblock will be there with Arizona. But while I don't think they'd ever cancel the series with Arizona, I think something else would be canceled in lieu of Kentucky, which by the way, let's throw this out there too. Man, I mean, IU schedule, non-conference schedule, kind of all of a sudden is going to end up being pretty hefty for the next couple of years. Maybe not. Whatever you think about the non-conference schedule this year, it's going to be more competitive, you would think, in the years following when you add Arizona to the list. So it's going to be quite the non-conference slate under Archie Miller, it appears.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think we're already seeing, in terms of talking about these things being down the road, I think we saw that this year. Archie has commented a couple of times about how difficult it's been to try to, revamp what is going to be on this coming season's schedule, how difficult that's been to kind of do on the fly. So, yeah, I think we're looking at a few years down the road in any case. So certainly some of these events can run out and they may decide not to renew them and go from there. But we'll definitely see a couple different sets of Wildcats everybody's looking forward to potentially playing for sure. You're listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Andy Bottoms here with Zach McCright talking IU basketball, and we are answering some of the Twitter questions that we got this week. I'm going to combine these next couple that are really around, point guard heading into not this coming season, obviously, but next season. You guys touched on this a bit last week, talking about the recruiting and that, those 3 wing guys really coming in and that, fulfills and gives some depth in that part of the roster. But the biggest question mark is point guard. So the questions from Jason in one case was, who do you anticipate committing next, and who do you think the point guard will be next year? Robert Fennessy was thrown out as a potential option there. And then Courtney asked, we've been talking a lot about needing a point guard in 2018. What would a Darius Garland signing mean for Devontae Green? So however or whichever of those you want to take, what are your current feelings based on what you're hearing and reading about right now in terms of what the point guard situation might look like a year from now?
Man, it's it's kind of it's murky. I mean, it feels kind of murky. I guess my one thing is you probably want to give at least keep an eye open, I guess, at least for Al Durham, just to see what happens there at the point guard position. When it comes to recruiting, and I've said this on this show before, I'm kind of a wait till they get here kind of guy, just because unless I'm seeing full game tapes, the highlight reels kind of always make me bite my fingernails, that I get too excited before I really should be. But Al Durham's obviously somebody in the interim. I don't think it's somebody that everybody's kind of looking at and saying this is the long-term option here. So after that, I think we're kind of up in the air. It's obvious. I think we're at the point now where it's obvious a point guard needs to be. It's number one on Archie Miller's list at this point. Well, with the exception of perhaps a Romeo. I think point guard is next up on the list. So maybe in that order, Romeo and then point guard. And in the meantime, you've got maybe for next year, for a year down the line. You maybe got an Al Durham for now. So, yeah, I think Finney's probably the one that a lot of IU fans that are into recruiting are kind of keeping their eye on big time outside of Romeo.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Devontae is another guy we talk about, who's going to be who's going to suggest how successful IU is. And I think he's another guy who falls in that category because, this is a big year for him. While he may not get the opportunity to start, he at least has, the chance to put himself in the driver's seat to be the point guard of that team next season. Now, obviously, maybe signing a really highly rated guy like Darius Garland might change that, which I think is ultimately the point of the question. But I think if it's a guy like Finney and Devontae Green has a good season, I think it could be a situation where Finney's able to, step in, learn from him for a little bit and go from there. If it's a guy like Garland, I'm not sure he's somebody that you sit right away, just based on, his talent level and those kinds of things. But I do think as you look through some of the guards who were successful under Miller at Dayton, there's a little bit of a pedigree that might suggest that Devontae Green is a guy, who could also be successful in that system. So I'm not ruling him out by any means. I know he was a guy that Ryan and I in particular, I think were, pretty high on by the end of the season and wanted to see more of him. Sure. as last season kind of got away from, where we all hoped it would go. So he's a guy I'm definitely interested to see. And I think depending on how quickly these guys commit, there's probably a little bit of leeway for him to really assert some control over that as a sophomore. So
he's got a shot.
We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, he's certainly got a shot. I wasn't against Devontae Green at all. I think the reason I didn't mention him was I think, and maybe this isn't fair to Archie, but I think we're all maybe subconsciously assuming that he will over recruit. He will recruit over, I should say, Devontae Green. So we're just kind of assuming that Green will always be playing second fiddle at the point guard position. But maybe we are. I'll just say it. We are. We're too early to make that assumption. I thought Devontae Green proved last year that he is at least worthy of discussion in the point guard position. And remember, he's just a freshman last year. It's not like it's not like he was some veteran guy who just got, minutes off the bench and this is just the way he's going to be forever. And it's not like that. So I think Green certainly got some room to grow, at least, if he's just like any other freshman in college basketball. So he's a name definitely to keep out there for sure.
All right. Well, coming up in our last segment, we have another question or two we may try to hit and see what other kind of trouble we can get into in the last few minutes of this week's show. So stick with us for the assembly call.
What are people saying on YouTube here? Let's see.
I never have that open. I have no idea how to do it. I like to have so many things open during the thing.
I just decided to look at it now. It looks like people are commenting on the second best program IU's never played.
Nice.
No Southern Cal. Oh, no, he says never mind. They have played him. Let's see. Same guy says never played Dayton. Quite the coincidence. Let's see. Also Oklahoma State. West Virginia. Has IU never played West Virginia? Interesting. So maybe there's more than I thought.
I would not have guessed.
I would have figured over the years all these teams had played each other by now. Maybe not.
I would agree. All right, so we only got like 3.5 minutes before I got to do the outro. So
awesome. Hit one question and go. I'll get out of your way as fast as I can.
Well, I'll tell you what. I will throw you, because we can kind of punt other parts of this question, but I'll let you do your the IU artifacts. Like, what's your favorite Assembly Hall memory?
That'll work.
I can kind of allude to, we'll kind of joke. I'll joke through what, Ryan's and Jared's might be, and just kind of say we can hit on those next week, but I'll give you a chance to do that. And then I'll try to put the time in the YouTube, or in the chat there, and we'll go from there. Cause the other one was about IU transfers, which, I can at least answer this one here. I don't know if the person will be watching this, but it was a question about IU transfer to have the biggest impact for their new team throughout. Stan Robinson, Max Hotzel, Emmett Holt, I would not say Hotzel. I was looking at some of his stats from last year, and he seemed to just kind of stand around and shoot threes. This was, I saw this up. 150 of his 187 shots were from three-point range, and he shot just under 35% from three. So
nothing to write home about.
Every time I watched them play, I just felt like he was just chucking up shots. So I would not say him. I think, Jared and I have long loved Stan Robinson, and watching him play so well in that NCAA tournament game was some level of like vindication for us that we were right and we did see something. And I think there's a little bit of opportunity for him to get some more playing time for them this year. They had a couple guys, although bigger guys, leave. But as anyone who watched Stan Robinson play, he played a little bit of center for IU. I feel like trying to go with AJ Hammonds or somebody like that. So he'll be there, and then Providence should be pretty good for Emmett Holt. They didn't lose a whole lot of anybody, but he was pretty good and pretty efficient. So I think probably one of those two would be, I guess, the choices of those three. I think both Stan and Emmett can have fairly good seasons coming up. So,
by the way, don't be giving Andy a bunch of. Not only is it just an IU based show we do here, but it also is July. Don't be giving Andy any bubble busting questions for the Q&A, for the Twitter Q&A.
Yeah. As we talked about before, I'm sure this person is not watching the live show, but there's somebody, I forget that while many people who follow me are IU fans, there are some who are just college basketball fans who have found me over the course of time for a bracketology perspective. And there's a big Kansas State fan who I've interacted with often, and I did not put the qualifier of needing IU basketball questions when I sent out a tweet asking for other questions for the show. And so his question was about whether I thought Kansas State would make the tournament this year, and my answer to him, I have no idea. I won't say I've done no research in terms of who's back where and things like that, because that would be that would not be giving credit to the nerd that I am in terms of looking at some of that. But I've not gotten to a point where I've done bracketology yet in July. So I usually save that for early October. And then watch
returning starters for the Kansas State Wildcats yet, have you?
Yeah, I probably though. I do have a spreadsheet that has in there who they have back. So they did lose.
Really?
I have pulled up. They lost Wes Iwundu, who got drafted in the second round of the NBA draft. DJ Johnson, double-digit scorer. So they did lose a couple guys who played.
You did bring answers to that Kansas State fan. He's not listening.
I do have a spreadsheet. So it's partly sad. I mean, nobody's disputing that, but So,
I love it. I wish I had the time to do it. I envy what you do. I really do.
The time is short now. It's probably a little bit out of date with all the transfers. It's difficult to keep up with those these days. But
I won't 200, 300 transfers a year. Jesus.
Yeah, I will not rail against the transfer epidemic because I don't necessarily buy into all that. But we'll work our way through it. But all right, let me copy his question down here, and then you can start with that, and we'll wrap it up. All right, I'll kick it to you first too for the at least the preliminary answers to the who IU hasn't played. So you can rattle off a couple of the quick ones that we saw in the chat, since we did ask for people to do the work and they heeded the call.
They did the work.
All right, let me get back here and we'll get started. Probably would help if I actually finished and completed the third segment. That was almost not good. Almost not very good. All right, so we got about 3.5 minutes, and we will wrap it up. Welcome back. You're listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Andy Bottoms here talking IU basketball with Zach McCrite. And Zach, we asked, and even before the show is even over, people have started to heed the call for people doing work for us to see who the best or at least most notable college basketball programs that IU has not played yet are. So what are some of the initial responses that you saw people submitting as we were talking through the rest of the show?
Good work, people. Good work. We got one who says New Mexico. Let's see, New Mexico. These are some of the ones, and we have not verified these, but I trust you. I trust you, IU chatters. New Mexico, Dayton, which is quite the coincidence, the guy says. Also, Oklahoma State. So let's put Oklahoma State at the top so far of those teams. They also say a lot of the military schools, Army, Navy, Air Force, West Virginia. So maybe West Virginia and Oklahoma State at the top of teams that with the best programs that IU has never played. So assuming all of those are accurate, those are some of the ones that are up there right now.
All right, good work, fine people.
Good work.
And
good work.
We'll see. Maybe we can come at an official final answer by the time we get back to this next week. But appreciate you guys heeding the call so quickly. So Zach, we don't have a ton of time left. Did want to get your answer to this question that came from IU Artifacts. And the question is, what is your favorite Assembly Hall memory for each of you? So, Ryan, as people may know, has strong opinions about the Marco Killingsworth dunk, which listeners to a variety of old shows could hear about. Jared's will assuredly be about Calvert Cheney breaking the record. I'm not sure exactly what mine would be. I have a few things in mind, which maybe I'll be able to get to next week. But I wanted to give you time to share what your favorite Assembly Hall memory was for you here.
Now, did we have to be there? That's the big qualifier.
I'm gonna say yes, because I know Ryan was obviously at the Killingsworth game, and Jared I know was at the Calvert Cheney game. So if you have one that comes to mind that's not that way, you can go that direction. But just specify which realm you're in.
Then it has to be 2000 IU over Michigan State with the Haston 3 at the buzzer to win. That's the one in person. In terms of overall, that opens up a huge door. But obviously, Knight throwing the chair, that one comes to mind. The Killingsworth dunk absolutely came to mind for me. So tip of the cap to Ryan. I don't mean to jump on his back with that one, but that's definitely one that's up there. But yeah, definitely for me, I think in person, Haston with the 3 to beat #1 Michigan State, and I think it was the year 2000. The first real signature win of the Mike Davis era. I gotta put that one at the top of the list.
Yeah, I think it was actually 2001. That was the year after I graduated. Although I did see IU beat Michigan State on a buzzer beater on an AJ Guyton airball / pass to Lynn Washington that won a game. So we talked about that a little bit with AJ on the show there. But all right, well, that is going to do it for this week's episode of the Assembly Call. If you want to see us do the show live and be part of the live chat, join us at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live simulcast of our Assembly Call radio recording, or you can always subscribe to our podcast by searching for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to go to assemblycall.com/join to activate your free Assembly Call membership. So thank you for listening. We'll be back to talk IU hoops again with you next week. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers. All right, 6. I think that was about right. All right. Save this off.
Thank you, YouTubers. Well done.
Yes. Well done on the research, and I'm actually surprised at some of it. I'm kind of surprised at any of it, quite honestly. I mean, a program that's been around as long, I know obviously teams didn't always travel a ton and some of those kinds of things, but fairly surprising. The Dayton one, I think, is really interesting. Just regionally, you would think that there would be something, but apparently not so much. So maybe that'd be an interesting one if Archie was wanting to get that one going as well. I don't think there's any animosity left between those two sides, so that seems like at least a potential possibility.
Be interesting if he threw that one in there.
Yeah. So I don't know. We will see, but good deal. Well, we definitely appreciate everybody joining us, and Zach, thanks for being on, and we will talk to everybody again next week. We'll see what combination of us is around as we navigate the off season and all the other things that go along with that. But appreciate everybody joining us, and we'll talk again soon.
See you guys.
All right. Thanks, Zach.